Elden RIng Nightreign released their new high difficulty ranked mode called the Deep of Night, and as many of you are probably aware, especially if you're watching this video, this mode is extremely challenging. It's almost ridiculously hard. Now, this mode essentially acts as New Game Plus, but with a few added twists. It's not only the enemy health scaling a little bit up, but it's also an addition of a new weapon type and different red enemies as well. So I'm going to show you guys some advanced tips and tricks to get better at the Deep of Night, because despite this mode being extremely challenging, it is winnable with the right strategy, and I'm going to show you a lot of what I've learned. So real quick, let's start with the basics. What exactly is the Deep of Night? As I said, it's a ranked mode in which if you win, you will gain score, furthering your depth and increasing your number, and if you lose, you will actually fall down in rank. So you want to definitely make sure you're winning and playing strategically and carefully, because losing is definitely punishing. But in addition to the enemies being much harder in the game, you now have access to 3 new relic slots on top of the ones that you already have. Keep in mind, these additional relic slots do work with the ones that you have applied, but they don't retroactively go back to the normal game if you're not playing Deep of Night. These are only applicable here, but if you're playing Deep of Night and maybe it's your first game, you don't have any of these deep relics yet, you can actually use your merc or your currency and go over to the shop and buy a couple of them for your first few games. Now, I'm going to point out a couple of the ones that are specifically really good for this mode, but just for the time being, if you don't have any deep relics yet, if you haven't approached the mode yet, you can buy some here. Obviously, you will win some as you play the game, and you'll be given some as rewards, but if you just want to buy a couple, make sure to do that first. But once you get how the basic gameplay with these new relics work, let's go a little deeper. As soon as you enter a game, you're going to notice that enemies on occasion, either bosses or just regular field enemies, can be red. Now, I'm going to say that as a recommendation, for the most part, stay away from boss enemies that are red. There's a reason for this, but any like just normal, small field enemies, trash mobs, stuff like that, if you kill one of these red enemies, they are guaranteed to drop a cursed weapon or piece of equipment. And what this means is that it actually comes with 2 upsides, but it does come with 1 downside, and these can be pretty brutal sometimes. You do need to be level 7 to fully utilize the red cursed weapons, but at the same time, you want to look out for what the downside is, because a lot of them can be detrimental to your game, and I wouldn't recommend stacking a full armory with all cursed weapons. Maybe 1 here and there is fine, and you need to be picking and choosing about which downsides you're willing to accept. Stuff like increased Knight's Tide damage, I think, is a pretty safe bet, especially because that becomes a non-factor once you get into the actual Night Lord boss. But by and large, I'm just going to say that these cursed weapons are not quite as powerful as you might think, or you shouldn't spend your entire game trying to kill red enemies, because these do have much increased health, and the problem is they take a long time to kill, especially like major bosses or any Everjail enemies. Sometimes the amount of time you need to spend killing a red enemy is simply not worth the reward. So my general advice would be, especially if you see red enemies in the castle like Crucible Knights or Giants, is to avoid the red ones if you can, and go after the ones that aren't red if possible, if it can be avoided. Sometimes it can't, and you need to take those fights, but in the case that you can either take a non-red Crucible or a red one, take the non-red every single time. Now, the major exception to this, though, and something you should go after every single time if they are red, are the Flame Chariot encampments, especially if you're past level 2 or 3, because if you're level 1, you will not be able to one-shot these even if you plunge attack them, so just be mindful of that. But the Flame Chariots are always an easy kill, and because they're red, they do give you slightly increased runes without having the extra time spent on a traditional enemy. So fire encampments, always look out for Flame Chariots. They're very valuable in this mode. Next, while every character is more or less viable in this mode, if you're starting out, I would especially recommend you play Wilder, as he did get a buff recently, especially to his charged art attack that leaves fire on the ground. This does additional damage and is pretty much a must-have, but I would recommend playing Wilder because his 6th Sense allows you to withstand a lot of attacks that would otherwise just one-shot you, especially when you get to depth 4 and 5. You're just getting one-tapped by literally everything, so this is a nice bonus. But once you get more comfortable with the mode, then other characters become viable. As most of you know, the medicinal boluses that you can find around the map and consume do stack effects throughout your game, but what you may not know is that in the most recent update, they've basically doubled the amount of health that these give back to you, so this can be an actual very viable health option if you're looking for something other than a flask or a warming stone. Boluses are pretty good even just for HP. Recently, a lot of colossal weapons got a slight nerf to their stance damage, whereas a lot of like medium weapons, great swords, spears, stuff like that got a little bit of a buff to how much stance damage they do. do, which makes Wilder even more viable in my opinion. One of the best attributes you can get in the Deep of Night by far is the damage negation at full HP. You should 100% go out of your way to find this, and I feel like it's almost required, especially once you get into depth 3 and beyond, because you're getting one shot by almost everything, and health is extremely valuable, but it goes away quickly. And another way besides that to maintain your health is actually one of the most important relics for this. The description says that you can have a chance to restore HP post attack. This is really good. It typically does come with the downside of if you take damage, you get Scarlet Rot buildup or poison, something like that, but this is extremely worth the trade-off because it essentially has the Rotting Woods effect where, you can hit back to get your HP. It's basically Bloodborne. This is essentially a requirement as well. I don't think depth 3 and 4 are really even playable without this relic effect. Also, if you are playing Wilder, speaking of one of the best relics you can run is this one right here, which adds a bleed effect to Wilder's Claw Shot. This means your ability, when you grapple somebody, will proc bleed eventually. You can combine this with other bleed weapons, like a Forked Greatsword or something, to really lean into that playstyle, but you can continue to put on pressure and just HP loss on extremely chunky enemies with a move that is otherwise not very good. So this is another very necessary relic, especially if you're playing Wilder. In a mode where literally every single second counts, when you jump off of a high building, obviously you can see that you have this rolling animation effect, but you can cancel this roll landing by jumping in the air, and this has to be done after a jump that you input. And as you approach the ground, as soon as you begin this roll animation, once you're holding forward, right when the animation begins, you reset your stick back to the neutral position. This should completely cancel the rolling animation, saving you a little bit of time, allowing you to get back into a sprint easier. This is really good movement tech that, might look kind of pointless, but is actually really useful in this mode. One of the best things that could happen during your run is that Libra curses you, meaning that you need to go pay him off to get your health back. The earlier in the game this happens, the better, as you can pay him off and then start stacking runes, because the effect is that you will deal increased damage for the amount of runes you have. And I recommend that basically the way the math works out is if you can have around 100 to 200k runes by the end of the match, you don't even really need to be that far past level 12 and you will deal insane damage. Don't even worry about leveling up, just stack 100k to 200k runes, stop at about level 12 for optimal damage. Occasionally, when you're playing Deep of Night, you can have a few things happen with the Night Lords. One of the things is that you can get an icon that is unknown. You actually don't know what boss you're going to be fighting. However, if you know the loot pools or the seeds for this game, you can actually determine what Night Lord you're going to fight by the nighttime bosses that you get. And I'm going to have a link in the description that shows all of the nighttime bosses and their Night Lord association so that you can start preparing for that one that you inevitably get. Now, one thing you cannot prepare for that can just happen occasionally at random is instead of the normal Night Lord, you can actually just get an Everdark fight instead. And sometimes this is a benefit. I think the Dark Drift Knight, personally, I think his Everdark is easier than his normal vanilla fight. And sometimes it can be a blessing, but if you get Everdark Augur, just wrap it up. Now, real quick, let's talk about ranking points. In most cases, you'll get 200 per successful Night Lord run added to your score. However, if you lose, depending on where you lose and how bad, you can lose up to like 400 to 500. However, something you can do is if you have a game where you get map information missing, where you cannot see any of the POIs, you will actually get 300 usually for completing that run successfully. Any modifiers applied to your game typically give you better rewards. There's a relic that I think is kind of underrated, especially if you happen to get Crucible Knights in the castle, and if you get red ones specifically, and you are dead set on killing these things, if you can parry, there is actually a relic that gives you runes for critical hits, and I keep this one on because if you can just keep them in parry loops, you can get 600 every single time you land a parry. So not only do you get the massive rune increase from the kill of the Crucible Knight, but you get 600 just every time you land a critical. If you're not already deeply familiar with all of the shifting earths, I would recommend conjuring them at this table and then practicing them in a normal game, because Deep of Night can basically randomize the shifting earths for you, and you need to be into intimately familiar with all of them and how to clear them efficiently, because when they happen in your game, they are pretty much required to clear. Otherwise, you're really not going to be strong enough for the Night Lord in most cases. Now, having an understanding of how the loot pool works and the different tiers of enemies that you can face is extremely valuable when it comes to how you want to approach your game plan. Instead of farming just low tier field bosses that are going to give you basically the same blue weapons over and over again, you'll want to know which ones are mid tier, which ones are high tier, and I'm going to have a link in the description that shows you basically all of the loot pool in this game so that you can really try to cultivate what you want specifically in your match and not waste any time on enemies that aren't going to give you anything useful for your match. Something I like to do in my games is if I get a cursed weapon with the increased Knight's Tide damage and I need to go into the storm for some reason, I like to drop it outside first, and then I run into the storm, do whatever I got to do, pick up a Church of America, something like that, and then I come back and pick the weapon back up on my way in. Or at the end of nighttime bosses, if you want to just kind of go slightly outside the border of the storm to kill a few enemies to maybe charge your ult before the Night Lord or whatever, you can then drop the weapon and then go out there too and pick it back up on your way in. This is just a neat little tip that I started doing. Here's a tip: if you get the pot throwing giants, which are incredibly infuriating to deal with, the best way to take these is actually start from the side of the castle right here where all of these like gravity stone diggers are, and if you go around the side and take the one that's up on this bridge, you really can't get hit by any of the other trolls from this point, and then you can start working your way through them. But this is the safest one to begin with, as you won't get hit by other giants as you're killing it. If you find a cursed scarab, these are worth killing as they give you 2 different talisman drops, and these don't typically come with downsides, so there's no reason not to kill them. This relic gives you about 5% more attack power for every single Everjail enemy you defeat, and obviously this is still one of the best relics in the game. However, once you get to about depths 2 or 3, I would recommend that if you get a red enemy, for the most part, if it's not killable, just skip it. There's a lot of ones that are just not worth the time. The Dragonkin Soldier or even the Beastman, that's too many enemies to take on, and with the overinflated health pools that they have, if they're red, I would recommend just skip these, find a church, get another stone sword key, and try again. Honestly though, even at the lower depths, the game plan isn't too different. It's really just about avoiding red enemies most of the time, at least major bosses that is, because they're just not worth the time that it takes to actually kill them, and the rewards, if you can find a better weapon that is more suited to the Night Lord you're going to be fighting, is just simply not worth to do it. Anyways, here's my Wilder relic setup currently. I've used Duchess and I think she's alright for solo, but I still think Wilder's the overall best pick if you're learning how to play this. Once you get into like depths 3 and 4, maybe you can start experimenting a little bit, but for now, I would recommend trying Wilder and as close to this relic setup as you can manage, as this does seem to be pretty effective. But anyways, I wanted to show you guys some tips because this mode is really hard. Good luck with it. Hope this helped, and I'll see you in the next one. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you later.